Thank you for joining, everybody. Now my name is Jos. I'm a VFX artist at Tuatara. So what I will be showing off today is this effect right here. So this is basically like, what is this? Is basically an effect based around the manipulation of light. So that was the basic theme of it. And sort of the aim was to get sort of a spell effect down, also combine it together with sort of more of a cinematic camera approach as well. So, and the major technique that was kind of used here was one technique that is sort of used throughout the like the entire effect. And that's the chromatic aberration. That is basically grabbing a like grayscale input, multiplying this 2 times, then offsetting the red channel to the left, or scale it up, grabbing the blue channel and offsetting that to the right, or even or another transformation, and leaving the green channel unaffected. Combine this back into a float 3, and that's when you basically get the chromatic aberration effect. And then on top of that, there's also this thing where you can then just saturate this more, so it will start to get this very like rainbow type look. So must also say that the project itself will be available on GitHub. There is a version of it that will basically be the same, but with an untextured character. So that will this is basically to like reduce the overall size, because the character you'll see here is called Thereth, and it's like also available on the Unreal Marketplace for free, so we can then play around with it. So if we then go over to the first thing right here, so this is basically what I was like initially talking about first. So let me put this right here again. So this is kind of what most of the effect is based on, like I said. Just like offsetting the textures. And what this looks like is this basically what it looks like. So I've got this function right here. This will also be available in the project as well. And mostly what this does is, this is kind of like this right here is kind of the area I need to worry about most. Because what this does is this is taking in a texture sample. Over here, you then put in the like standard UV coordinates. Over here, you add an offset to it, and over here you subtract like an offset. So this is then sort of like expressed as a overall strength. And like instead of saying like, oh, this is the amount of units you will place it in, you then say like, oh, this is how powerful the offset will be. So what this then does is then right here combines it into flow 3, and then since you like to use packed textures, you can then say you can like grab the result of either the red, the green, the blue, or the alpha channel. And there's also this in-between step here where you can then say this is how much the saturation will be of the end result. All right, and on to the next elements right here. So the like triangles right here is sort of like a tertiary effect that's like more sprinkled throughout as to give it a bit more extra detail. Because what this essentially is if you look at this straight ahead, you will most likely see not much happening. But the more you like, the more choose the angle gets, like the more the background gets distorted, and also there's more like chromatic aberration applied. It's sort of similar as the technique that's shown in the texture, but I will show this a bit later. But in this case, this is done by offsetting, by basically grabbing your screen, grabbing the basically the end result of your buffer, and then offsetting a screen space UV to the left and to the right. And yeah, what it looks like is right here. This is kind of, yeah, like I said, pretty much similar to what was done in the textures. But as you can see here, I grab the screen aligned UVs as the input, offset it to the left here in the red channel, and offset it to the right here in the blue, and leave the green channel unaffected. And then based on this view angle fade, so yeah, this is kind of a mask that is, let's actually grab this. It's actually a mask that is then saying like the more obtuse the angle is, the more of the mask gets revealed. And yeah, this is based on the power, and then yeah, like this is basically then revealing this scene color that is then multiplied by 5. So this will then basically cause the shimmering effect, like the more obtuse the angle will be. And then over here, since this is working based on refraction, the thing you need to do is you need to make sure that you blend between a default value of 1. So let's say you put in a refraction value of like 1.1 in this case. You need to then blend it. You need to sort of blend it together back to a value of 1 again, so it sort of neutralizes everything. Because what you'll sometimes see in a refraction is that it sort of pops out, but that's basically because the refraction is still higher or lower than the value of 1. All right, and yeah, that's kind of the same thing that's happening here, but this is more of a element that is sort of encompassing the beam. But what's mostly happening here is that this is a, let me actually open the mesh itself. This is kind of what the mesh looks like. Sort of a like cup-shaped mesh that is then distorted and then triangulated. But what then is but when I did then is basically split each polygon into a like a UV island, and then scaled everything down to the smallest size possible. And that was basically causing the offset right here. Because if I then open the shader here, so since the like the UV islands are very small, you can basically put in any like noise you want, and that will then, based on the pixel, it will then offset it to a like bigger or smaller amount or in a different direction. What you also see here is a function that is like taking care of a vector rejection. So don't think it actually in the like in the end result it was used all that much, but this is basically to then say scale all those triangles back down again. But one thing of a note here is that it only then works based on the like mesh, like the mesh particle space. So if you were to offset this, you will basically get some problems. So since this is local, this would not be a problem, but the like basically in this case I set it to the mesh particle space, so then result in them like scaling back down again. And on to the next thing. So right here, this is like an element that is basically implemented into the stuff. But the thing was, I initially wanted to do this with the ribbons, but since I wanted to be sort of quite smooth, the thing was is that I probably would have had to spawn a lot of particles in there for a ribbon to get smooth. And with any like hitches, that you will also get to see that. You could say you do like a couple of you spawn in a couple of particles there and then smooth out the end result like in the ribbon renderer. But what in essence I wanted to do is something that followed smoothly and had sort of more control over. And as you can see, this sort of like lags behind a little bit. And sort of the way this was done, I had this mesh here. These are like sort of like these trumpet-like or like tube-shaped meshes, sort of arranged in like in a sort of a star shape, and blended those together. One thing of note here is that there's also the green vertex color here. And that's basically done to, as you can see, this scrolling texture. This is to say, like in the panner, if you then add this to the time, actually to the time node, this would then offset the panner by a random amount based on the vertex color. So this would basically mean that the scrolling texture would not look the same on all of these different parts. But if we then go into the shader itself, also forgot to mention that the way sort of the staff works is that the amount of energy then gets bigger, and that they sort of need to smoothly follow the staff, so to speak, and that's why I kind of went for this approach. But mostly what's happening here is this is the important part that takes care of the lag. What you need to then first sort of initialize is a dynamic parameter. And this will basically mean like, okay, this will be the rest position of all the vertices. You subtract the particle position from it. And then with a clamp, you basically then say, this is the amount of this is the maximum amount of distortion in world units it can then do in both the positive and the negative. And then based on this gradient right here, it will then say the less of a value this has, the more like that vertice then gets lags behind the main target, so to speak. And there's also a component in Niagara that I'll get into, but yeah, this is basically what needs to happen in the shader. And this curve right here is then basically like a curve atlas, and a curve that is that you can then sort of manipulate and see sort of in real time what it does. And this is to sort of more get sort of more control over the what the behavior of each tendril is when you sort of move it around. So the actual Niagara part of it is that if you then first initialize the dynamic material parameters here, so you can then say, okay, this is the rest position of everything in the mesh. Then you have the interpolate over time node. And then what this does is basically takes in like a variable type that you want to interpolate, and also a target value that is then tied into this variable type. And this will then interpolate this value based on a rate of change. And this rate of change will then say like how fast does this like variable type need to be like interpolated between. And that's sort of done here, because in the interpolate over time you have like it writes a parameter called the interpolate over time. And that's what you then sort of call into a float for from vector and float. And this will basically then mean this is what it then interpolates. And the float here is then actually what we said in the dynamic parameter first, is that this will then determine how strong the actual like distortion or the world position offset will be. We just set it to 1 because we just want to have like the full amount of distortion here. And yeah, all of the lags and again being handled by the gradient. There is one caveat, because this inherent source movement right here is sort of a sort of a hack in this case. What it needs to have is information of where the particles has moved. Because if you were to say I want to put this into local space, then the like particle in question doesn't know that it has moved, so then the like actual interpolation effect doesn't work. Ideally, you want to maybe then like put this effect onto a skeletal mesh and then attach it in the particle update here. So it will then know it moved, like this particle would move in between point A and point B. And then it can interpolate based on this. So the inherent source movement will basically be like, okay, it will always apply whatever position I move my system to, and then it will know, okay, my particle has moved. And then over here, what you then need to make sure of is that in the dynamic material binding right here, you set this like parameter that we created here into here, so that it will then know, okay, this is what then needs to be like modified. All right. So on to the next element here. Some of you might, or some of you might not know, but there's this like really handy like material function called spline thicken. So in essence, what you then sort of input is a very thin strip of polygons, maybe around like a 1 centimeter like in thickness. And then what the actual function does is it will then stretch out all the polygons again, and then it will make them camera facing. Actually, maybe just zoom in. It might not be too obvious, I think, on stream, but what it tries to do is sort of let all the polygons then follow along. So in essence, you can sort of see this as a like a particle ribbon that you have more control over. But yeah, this is more like in case you want to have a ribbon that has that needs to have more predictable and more constant like a behavior, so to speak. And that's basically what that is. So in shader, that basically looks very simple. Like in essence, what you kind of need to do is just making sure that the tip of the width and the base are defined, and you then just plug that into the wall position offset, and that's basically it. All right, and there's this final element right here, the light rays. What you sort of can do is you can say, I want to have this just on a flat card and like radially distort whatever like input you have. That's one thing you can do, but in this case it's a little bit cheaper. Because in essence, what's happening here is this mesh with just like a really tiny hole in the middle. So I can just lay out the UVs flat, and then basically map that shader onto it. And yeah, the reason it needs to have this many polygons is to counteract the UV distortion. Because if you leave it at a too low subdivision, it will then just start to really look weird and like get distorted, so to speak. And the thing you need to do here is then, or actually, just what the shader is that this basically has a input here of any noise you want. But the major thing is that the V tiling is set to 0, so it just gets stretched out like along the U direction. In that case, I sort of pan them together, and then you sort of get this shining effect that you would then see here. And in the actual particle itself, I will just set this mesh to camera facing, and that yeah, they'll basically get the like actual like light ray effect you see. So if we then go back, so if we then go into this in a bit more detail, so what is happening here in the sequencer is that this character also comes with like a lot of actual like animations you can play with, but what's basically happening here is that I simply just splice them together with different speeds, But in this case, sort of hacked it together so it has the movement, but this is really finicky. So yes, you have to really sort of dial this in yourself to see what kind of feels right. So there was this initial this on phase, so to speak, where sort of the like the staff gets flicked on, and the initial sort of build-up starts to happen. And you will also see here this these like more texture elements that take care of all the sort of the like the major glow that will always stay on. I'll actually go into that now, because all the texture elements right here, like these are sort of more of the texture elements that are used throughout the effect itself. Like I like to use Substance Designer for this, but it could be basically anything you want. But like personally, I like this the most because it has, the major thing here is that like once you have set it up, it is just really easy to adjust something, save it, re-import it, and you're done. Like the initial like setup might be taking a bit longer than usual, but the iteration is just like so much faster, and that's really nice. But for the actual like actual texture elements, you have some other like elements that are taking care of the sort of fake lens flare, so to speak. And first you have this element, so a light ray with like the chromatic offset, and this is done by taking in this line and adding some anisotropic noise to it, the non-uniform blur to smooth out the peaks, directional blur to like to further smoothen it out in the like U direction, level this out so you get a bit more gaps in between. Then radial distortion, auto levels to normalize this, and actually then inputting some Perlin noise to get some variation in like light strength, and adjusting it just a little bit so it will then be both good for the levels for both the like actual the albedo and for both the the actual alpha itself. And over here, what I did is sort of scaled it down and up so you get the like the more like rainbow-like ring color right here, and that's what has been outputted. There's another element right here that is then sort of overlaid on top of all the other basically very bright effects. This is starting off by creating this ring and putting this like gradient on top of it, and then quantizing this so you get like 3 bands of color that you then map to a gradient. This is then being cut out by taking in these lines right here, clamping this to its maximum value, and then putting a radial distortion on this. Yeah, it's very hacky, but it kind of worked for this. So you would basically get this this shape right here. This will then be like radially blurred, then blurred again, and then put into sort of a place where it is then sort of straight again. And over here you have this sort of inky noise. The major thing with this was that for in terms of the actual texture type, sort of the texture or the actual look and feel of the entire effect is wanted to sort of be more inky, and yeah, it can be very easily created because you can take these 2 Perlin noises together and then start off with a multi-directional warp that is like very powerful, creating some very complex noises right away. You set this to like quite a high intensity and play around with either the average, the max, or the min to get like different results. Then slope blurring this to basically push all the values together, because if you then take the inverted result of this, like the brighter it is, the more the pixels get pushed in, and that's what this does. You like this then increase the contrast, and the non-uniform blur then smooths out the peaks by blurring the the brightest areas of the effect, or the effect actually the texture, and then normalizing this back to a 0 to 1 with the outer levels. And yeah, these are just some variations, and then packed together in this texture right here. So for this right here, yeah, it could be done in shader as well, but I decided to go for sort of more, I guess, say more in conventional route. This is by taking in a shape, then blurring this to get sort of the more rounded edges, inverting this, offsetting this, but making sure that the time mode is set to off. Histogram scan, sorry, to increase the contrast, and then mirroring this so you get this shape right here by making sure that all the corners are mirrored. Blending this together with this shape, so this would in essence be like making sure that the top and bottom have longer streaks in comparison to the left and right, increasing the contrast, and then smoothing out the peaks with a blur and a non-uniform blur. So as you can see in comparison, they would have like a very sharp peak, but with this then sort of smooth it out again. Combine this together with, yeah, this is basically just like a very blurred out, blurred result of this, but this would actually then be just like a very subtle glow. Blending this together right here, and then inverting this result and then pushing everything together by a lot, so you get very like sharp peaks. Making sure that everything is normalized, and then everything is then sort of stretched out into like a more suitable space, so as little negative space gets lost. This is actually the same thing, but just making sure that it is blurred. Because initially what I wanted to use this for was anything that would be close to the camera, I would then lerp in between this and this result. So you get sort of this fake, yeah, so sort of this fake bokeh effect, so to speak. And over here, this was sort of like a texture that would sort of aid in as a mask for the beam. Because if I would go back later, this is some problem that I occurred, that I came across, where it felt like the beam didn't really disengage from the exit point. And what this is a texture that scrolls over the beam and making sure that the tip is the most bright part, and everything with the actual like the noisy detail right here is then also being shown, but at a sort of a lower brightness. And at the end, we have this sort of fake lens flare that was sort of created by taking in a tile sampler. The major thing was to make sure that the X amount was set to sort of a high value and square is set to on. The major point of this was to make sure that I got some like variation in width of like each stripe. There must be a better way, but yeah, that's kind of how this sort of came to be. But then inverted this, so you get more streaks and more darker parts. So this gradient is then offset based on this, like basically this this input right here, and this is what you then get. So like the lighter each streak is, like the more it gets sort of offset. So this is basically to get sort of a variation in length for each sort of light ray. And then making sure to blend this together. Get rid of some of the like very smooth or very like sharp peaks. And then radially distort this, sorry. Making sure to get rid of the ends with multiplying the shape on top. Blurring this so you get, yeah, this kind of bit sharp here, so blurring this a little bit. And then these are sort of the like the arms, or sort of where you sort of get what based on how many blades the camera lens has. So in this case, you chose for 4. What do you mean? 6. And then this glow is then added on top, and is then blended together with this. The levels is to make sure that the edge compared to this is a little bit more irregular, and then stretch it back out again to make it fill up as much space as possible. And then again, did some like some scaling again, so you get this offset, and increase the saturation of this, and that will be it. So yeah, as you can see, there's actually something that I need to touch on in regards to like the chromatic aberration. Although although most of it was done in a function, one problem is that you will then basically use three texture samples in each material. It could be a bit better by just making sure to yeah, basically implement this in the texture itself. So you just get like 1 texture sample instead of 3. But I, in this case, just wanted to have a bit more control over it. So yeah, that's why I sort of chose for most of that, for that approach, just to do it in shader basically. So yeah, if you could then sort of go into each element a bit more in depth, you would then see that like once the stuff gets flicked on, the lens flare comes on together with the ring to get sort of this fake lens flare. Then the tendrils start to come in, and also later on the triangles start to come in and follow the tip of the staff. This would then this part would then indicate the actual like beam being fired. There's some extra things on top that that's done in camera that I'll then touch upon later. And then actual like beam gets fired, and there's also this extra screen space element that is then added on top, plus some extra like dust being fired away. So if you then go into the particle systems themselves, so so in essence, what you see here is this like these emitters that are comprised of more more than one renderer. This is kind of done to make sure that you can then like reuse it in other places and in a bit more easily. Because what you can sort of then define is, let's say you want to have certain behavior sort of carry through in a similar fashion without having to dial in similar looking emitter in other places with a similar like value. And if something then changes, then you need to dial this back again, and that's kind of you want to avoid. And yeah, it's kind of looks a bit like a big list of stuff. But in this case, you can, for example, easily say, yeah, if you take, for example, this glow, you might see that this pulsates a little bit. And this is then something that is sort of carried through in the color for all the other emitters right here by saying scaling the initial color of this first by the flash amount, and that's sort of done by taking a sine and then setting the speed, the scale, and the bias to make sure that it, in case you do not want it to dip below a certain value. And right here, this is sort of the same thing by just multiplying this on top of this, like this ring right here. So it will then flash at the same rate as the other element does. And then what you then do is, in case you have a variable that needs to be different, then over here you can see all the bindings here. And in this case, what I then put down is whatever I define here for like the color, the size, and let's say if it needs to grow over time, I can then put whatever like variable I defined here and then attached it back into this. And there's also one thing is, in case you want to let particles stay on for like a indefinite amount of time, so they have like an infinite lifetime. Like one thing you need to make sure is that the emitter state is set to once. And in the particle state, you like it will by default be set to this. You need to turn this off and turn this last this last option on, so it will then basically only keep this this particle alive for an indefinite amount of time until whatever you put in here as the inactive response, it will then sort of kill that off. For the light itself, that is also kind of a similar story. The actual light radius is then sort of defined here, because normally you wouldn't really have much control over it here. So yeah, I kind of define it as its own variable, so I would have like more control over it. Yeah, then here are the light rays, kind of like I said before. That was just the energy disk that I showed at the end of like the conga line of separate elements, and then just making sure that the facing mode is set to camera position. Over here, there is this inward energy that's coming in right at the end. Yeah, right here. Yeah, this is just majorly camera offset. This is kind of something that only worked inside of the camera, but this was just to sort of indicate when the the actual like beam is being fired. And if we then actually go into that, because most of the like energy elements are based on just making sure to pan some noises together and driving this through the chromatic function that I showed off at the beginning. And there's also this this function here called the crop. That is also something you will get. And this is to make sure that this is acting as a mask, so it will sort of basically, in the simplest terms, turn off the tiling. But another very handy thing about this is that whatever you set this to, so let's say you have like a U to V area that is 1 by 1. In that case, you can, for example, set this to, let's say, 0.5. And it will then sort of make sure that only this part is filled, and then you can offset this. You can then offset this. The actual extra fun part of this is that you can then like distort this part as well. And let's see if we can maybe show this off. It will not really do the actual like offset because you need like higher values for this, but like it will then offset this and then add the actual like noise you put in on top of this, so you get like a really this is really nice for all radial energies and stuff, and that is also what's kind of being used there. And that's also similar for the screen space effect that I will show a bit later. But let's see if I actually missed anything. Yeah, this is actually all those triangles that will then are being spawned in. These are then being attracted to the center point again with a point attraction force that's not too strong, so it will not really reach the center of the center of the staff when it has reached its end of its lifetime. And then at the end, there's also this burst. But actually, in the end, this is something you didn't really see all that much. But I think that was it for that one. So if we then go over to the actual beam itself, so this is taking in sort of that same pre-flash system, or at least emitter. Yeah, and in this case, just changed around what the materials would be like. Yeah, and that's the only thing you kind of needed to do, because then it would only be sort of copy and paste it into this to make sure that the biggest flash would then be created. And if you then go for the main beam, this is something that I kind of alluded to in the beginning. Actually, make this a bit bigger if I can. So as you can see, it sort of starts off by having this very bright tip, but at the end it would also disengage, and that's sort of done by that texture I was talking about earlier. So if you then go into the material, because yeah, this is basically done with this. This is then we then also do a debug times sign on top of this. As you can see, like it will just make sure that the beam will then get scrolled over the main beam itself, and the crop function then makes sure that that basically it will only tile once. So whenever it is past its point, like past the 1 point, it will then basically just mask everything out. But yeah, on top of this, there's also this element. Let me actually put this back here. So there's also this split panner, and this is a function that is, if we then actually preview this, this is taking in whatever grayscale input you want, and then there's this mask that's going down the middle, and then just flips the panning direction and makes it scroll the other way. This is basically just saying like, okay, this is your pen speed. Then flip all the coordinates of this around, so we get like a mirroring effect. And there's also one thing one needs to take care of in this case, and that so for the main like texture itself, I made sure to put it on another another UV set. So I can then sort of let it be tiled based on whatever I input into the ribbon renderer in the Niagara system. And the other part is taking care of just whatever masking needs to happen from the beginning to the end of the beam. So so basically this texture coordinate 0 will just be stretched along the length of the beam. So this will basically not tile. All right, so then there's this sphere mask right here that is then saying, okay, whatever my coordinates is, add in this noise texture and then add this to it. So this will then basically define what the overall like silhouette of the beam is. And when I then blend this back together again, I made sure to just leave out the middle, because that would be the brightest part, and just be like pure white in this case. And yeah, that's kind of it really. Just making sure that the whatever you put in the opacity is then saturated or clamped from a 0 to 1 value. And yeah, that's basically what the beam is about. It's a bit smaller again. Then there is this residual, oh, sorry. Then there is this residual beam, sort of the fade out at the end. Actually, let me move this down here. Yeah, it sort of gets bigger and also gets distorted just a little bit. And this is basically done by making sure that the ribbon in question is being spawned that has a few particles in it. But then, yeah, in this case, I did smooth it, so you will get sort of this like this smooth result by adding some velocity in. I think just X and Y in this case, so it will not start to fold in on each other. It will basically not start to fold in back on itself again. And yeah, then you have the swirls. That's kind of just left as is. Then there's this whole like refraction try element here that is just a burst of those tries and the exit here, and also that bigger mesh that is then sort of adding that extra complexity to it. And then what happened next was there's some extra like wind elements on top. As you can see here, these rings. That adds a bit of extra like impact to it by making it sort of act as a shockwave. And that's also done by the similar technique as the swirls use. Just making sure that it's a very thin ring, and then added some spline thicken to it, so you get sort of the thickness. There's also this extra like wind layer added on top of it. It's just being shown for a very brief moment. It works, like it lags a little bit here, but it works really well in camera, I found. And then actually there is this something I can show here. There is this area light. So like it needed to have some connection with the ground. Yeah, in this case, it was kind of being done with the area light, because what this is taking in is a component renderer, because it is still something that's quite experimental, but it is something that allows you to spawn anything in, anything you want, even though the particle system. So be very careful. But what this does is taking the area light that is being stretched to the actual length of the beam itself, and making sure that the overall light strength is then being mapped to a curve, so it will then decrease in intensity as soon as the like beam itself is faded out. And I think that's it for the beam itself, I think. And yeah, on the ground there's only this extra layer of dust here, and yeah, it's something that kind of more works more within the camera, but yeah, it's kind of works in camera. As you can see, it sort of gets helps with sort of the force that the how do you say this, the dust itself gets pushed away towards the camera, but like in side view it doesn't really work that well, I think. But let's see. There's also this added layer of just more directional dust here that is sort of wrapped around the beam itself. And that is basically by like grabbing a mesh and just stretching it out like as soon as the beam gets emitted. And then there is this extra like layer on top that's more of a screen space effect, but it's the same sort of principle as whatever I mean whatever this this radio energy uses. Just scrolling it from like a center point, and in this case it will be the center of the screen, and then it sort of pushes outwards only once, so sort of not repeat itself again. And sort of to close off, there are some final things within that are happening within the camera. There's just some subtle movement that's happening to the camera when the buildup is happening, just to add some extra interest to this. Sort of what you can see here, the gain of the camera is being turned out just as slightly. So it will then sort of indicate that okay, now pay attention. The main part of the effects is about to happen. Like once the energy is gathered, I turn down the gain all the way down, so you get this black frame, the white frame, a black frame again, and then I turn up the gain just a bit higher when the brightest part of the flash happens, and turn it back to normal again. So what this then looks like when you play it, it sort of helps with selling the impact just a tiny bit more. Yeah, with impact frames, you kind of, I guess, want to make sure to be very careful with them, because it can really, yeah, some people might not really like that as much. But I sort of wanted to try this out and making sure that the actual like impact itself is like really coming through. And I guess one final note is that you might have seen me just scroll around or scrub around the timeline like this. Actually, one thing I forgot was the camera was also being zoomed out a bit by just increasing the FOV and then pushing back with the beam itself, so everything just is like inside of the frame. And yeah, what actually indeed wanted to say was, yeah, you might have seen me scrolling around. Because when you create a life cycle track, by default, it will just start playing whenever you yeah, start to play the timeline, and it will not stop. But what you usually then do is, if you want to make sure that you can scrub through it, is set the age update mode to desired age. It will then it's then being able to play back whenever you simulate it, but once it's done playing, you cannot like refer. Like usually you cannot reverse it back, but I guess in this case you can. But that's very, very handy. Just preview everything and see how everything works together. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it for the presentation. And thank you so much again for watching and for all your generous donations. And okay, see you guys. And thanks for watching.